Cole had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had seen wars end and alliances form. She had watched species meet for the first time and learned to trust each other. Nothing in all those years prepared her for this moment. She stood in the grand negotiation chamber of Four, a neutral station that floated in the cold space between empires. The walls were made of polished black stone that reflected the light of distant stars. Around her sat delegates from 12 different species, each one representing billions of lives. They were new to the galactic community. They had made contact with the wider universe only 5 years ago. Their bodies were tall and thin, covered in pale gray skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their eyes were large and dark, showing no emotion that could read. They spoke in flat tones and measured words. High Coordinator was their leader at this meeting. He sat across from with perfect stillness. His species did not fidget or shift like humans did. They considered such movement to be a sign of weak minds. Was listening to discuss trade routes when her personal communicator vibrated against her wrist. She glanced down and saw the priority code that made her heart skip. It was from Earth Command, and it was marked with the highest urgency. She excused herself politely and stepped into a private alcove. Commander Daniel Perry's face appeared on her screen. He was a military man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a jaw that seemed to be made of stone. Right now, that jaw was tight with anger. "Ambassador, we have a situation," he said. "The convoy that went missing 3 weeks ago near space, we found out what happened to them." Remembered the reports. A trade convoy with 6 ships had vanished while passing through an uncharted sector. Search teams had found nothing. "What did you learn?" she asked. Daniel's voice dropped lower. One of the ships was the Bright Horizon. It was carrying passengers from the New Geneva colony. A school field trip, Ambassador. 47 children between the ages of 6 and 14. Felt the blood drain from her face. "The children, where are they?" "That is why I am calling you," Daniel said. "We have intelligence that suggests they intercepted that convoy. They took everyone aboard into custody. Ambassador, those children are somewhere in space right now." Closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her own back on Earth. She thought about 47 families who had been waiting 3 weeks for news. She thought about what she had to do next. "I understand," she said. "I will handle this." She ended the call and walked back into the negotiation chamber. Her face showed nothing. 30 years of diplomacy had taught her to hide her feelings behind a mask of calm, but inside, something cold and sharp was growing. She took her seat across from. There was discussing something about mineral rights but was not listening. She was waiting for the right moment. It came when mentioned their border security. He spoke proudly about how his people protected their territory from unauthorized vessels. He talked about how they had recently improved their detection systems. "In fact," said in his flat voice, "we recently secured several biological specimens from an unauthorized vessel that entered our space. They have proven quite interesting for our research divisions." The other delegates around the table showed mild interest. Species often collected samples from unknown vessels. It was considered normal practice for scientific study. Kept her voice steady. "Biological specimens, could you tell us more about them?" Tilted his head slightly. It was the closest his species came to showing curiosity. "They appear to be immature members of a known species, quite small. They require significant resources to maintain, but our scientists find them fascinating." "Which species?" asked. "Yours, Ambassador Cole. They are immature humans." The chamber went silent, felt every eye turned toward her. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, but she did not move. She did not blink. "You are holding human children," she said. It was not a question. "That is correct," replied. 47 specimens in total. They were aboard a vessel that violated our territorial boundaries. Under law, all cargo and passengers become property of the collective when such violations occur. His hands were flat on the table. She pressed them down hard to keep them from shaking. How long have you held them? 19 of your standard days, said. They have been housed in appropriate containment facilities and provided with basic nutrition. I assure you, we are not barbarians. We treat all specimens with proper care. Specimens, he called them specimens, stood up slowly. Every delegate in the room watched her. The ambassador, an old being with silver scales and wise eyes, leaned forward with concern. He had known humans for decades. He knew what was coming. High Coordinator said, I must ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you understand what human children are to us? Seemed confused by the question. They are your young, the immature form of your species. They will eventually grow into adults if given proper time and resources. They are not specimens, said. Her voice was still calm, but there was something beneath it now, something dangerous. They are not cargo, they are our children. Do you understand what that means? Looked at her with his dark, empty eyes. I understand the biological relationship. I do not understand why this changes anything. They violated our borders. The law is clear. Nodded slowly. She reached up and pressed a button on her communicator. A signal went out across the stars, reaching Earth Command, reaching every human ship within 100 light years. High Coordinator, she said, I am going to give you some time to reconsider your position. I suggest you use that time to learn about humanity. Specifically, I suggest you learn what happens when someone takes our children. She turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the ambassador rose and moved toward. His old voice carried across the room. You must listen to me carefully, the said. You do not know what you have done. You do not know what is coming. Release those children now before it is too late. Watched him with confusion. I do not understand this reaction. We have simply enforced our laws. Surely this can be resolved through proper diplomatic channels. The shook his head slowly. There are no diplomatic channels for this. You took their children, you put them in cages, and now every human in the galaxy knows about it. He paused and looked toward the door where had disappeared. God help you all. Far away in the cold depths of space, ships began to move. Messages spread from station to station, from colony to colony, from ship to ship. The word traveled faster than light itself. They took our children. And humanity began to wake up. Admiral Grace was 61 years old. She had gray hair that she kept short and practical. She had lines on her face from years of hard decisions and sleepless nights. She had commanded fleets through 3 major conflicts and had never lost her nerve. When the message reached her, she was sitting in her office at Earth Command. The words on her screen were simple, but they hit her like a physical blow. 47 human children held in detention, treated as specimens, held in containment for 19 days. She read the message twice. Then she stood up and walked to her window. Outside, the lights of the military complex stretched into the darkness. Ships moved in the distance, their engines glowing like fireflies. Grace had 4. The youngest was 7 years old. She thought about that little girl sitting in a cold cell somewhere in space. She thought about her being poked and studied like an animal. She thought about her crying for her parents. Then Grace made a decision. She turned back to her desk and activated the fleet communication system. Her voice went out to every ship in the 3rd Fleet, then to every available vessel in the sector. This is Admiral, she said. All ships are to prepare for immediate deployment, full combat readiness. We move in 6 hours. Across human space, the response was instant. On a mining station near the outer colonies, workers put down their tools and walked to the transport bay. They had heard the news. They did not need to discuss it. The station manager tried to stop them, but they pushed past him without a word. On a merchant vessel carrying cargo between systems, The captain changed course without consulting anyone. His cargo could wait. Some things were more important than contracts. On a retirement colony where old soldiers had gone to find peace, men and women opened storage containers they had not touched in years. They pulled out uniforms that still fit and weapons they still knew how to use. They sent messages to the fleet, offering their service. Lieutenant Shaw was 28 years old. He served aboard the battleship Resolute as a junior tactical officer. When the alert came through, he was eating dinner in the mess hall with his fellow officers. His hands started shaking when he read the report. One of the children on that list was named Tommy Shaw. He was 9 years old. He was nephew. Stood up from the table. His food sat untouched. He walked to his station and began running calculations for the fastest route to space. His fingers moved across the console with desperate speed. His commanding officer found him there an hour later. She put a hand on his shoulder. "We will get them back," she said. Did not look up from his work. "Yes, we will." On the diplomatic station of 4, the Galactic Union Council had gathered for an emergency session. Representatives from 30 species filled the chamber, their voices mixing in confusion and concern. The ambassador stood before them. His name was, and he had spent 40 years studying humans. He understood them better than any other non-human in the galaxy, and right now he was terrified. "You must understand what is happening," said to the assembly. "They have made a terrible mistake. They have crossed a line that should never be crossed." A delegate from the hegemony spoke up. His species was large and powerful with thick armored skin. They feared nothing in the galaxy. "It seems like an excessive reaction. The children are unharmed. Surely this can be resolved through negotiation." Shook his head. "You do not understand humans. None of you do. You see them as just another species. Clever, adaptable, somewhat aggressive. But there is something about them that you have never witnessed." He paused and looked around the chamber. "Humans are protective of all their members. This is true. But their children are different. Their children are sacred to them in a way that is difficult to explain." "All species protect their young," they said. "Not like humans," replied. "Human children take nearly 2 decades to mature. During that time they require constant care, constant protection, constant love. Humans form bonds with their children that last their entire lives. They will sacrifice anything for them. They will do anything to protect them." He took a deep breath. "I have seen human parents lift vehicles that should be too heavy to move because their child was trapped underneath. I have seen soldiers charge into certain death because a child was in danger. I have seen entire nations go to war because children were threatened." The chamber was silent now. "They took 47 human children," continued. "They put them in cells. They treated them as specimens for study. They have held them for 19 days. He paused. "And now every human in the galaxy knows about it." "What will they do?" someone asked. Before could answer, an alarm sounded throughout the station. The main display screen flickered to life, showing the space around 4. Ships were arriving. Human ships. They came out of faster-than-light travel in groups of 5, then 10, then 20. Battleships and cruisers, destroyers and carriers, transport ships and medical frigates. They kept coming, more and more, filling the space around the station with an armada unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The delegate stared at the screen with wide eyes. "How many ships is that?" Watched the display as the numbers continued to climb. "All of them," he said quietly. "That is every human ship that could reach this location. Civilian and military, old veterans who came out of retirement, merchants who abandoned their cargo, colonists who left their homes." He turned to face the assembly. "They are all coming." On the station, watched the same display from his quarters. His dark eyes reflected the lights of the human fleet. Beside him stood his aide, a younger who had begun to understand that something had gone very wrong. "High Coordinator," the aide said, Perhaps we should reconsider our position." Was silent for a long moment. "This is not logical," he finally said. "We enforced our laws, we did nothing wrong. This response is completely out of proportion to the offense." "Nevertheless," the aide said, "they are here and more are coming." Watched another wave of ships arrive. The human fleet now numbered over 300 vessels. It was larger than the entire navy, and they had assembled it in less than 6 hours. "What do they want?" asked. As if in answer, a single message appeared on his screen. It was from Ambassador Cole. The message contained only 4 words. "We want our children." Far away, in a cold detention facility on a moon, a little girl named Maya sat in a corner of her cell. She was 8 years old. She had dark hair and brown eyes that used to shine with laughter. Now those eyes were dull with fear and exhaustion. Around her were 6 other children, the youngest only 6 years old. Maya had become their protector over the past 19 days. She held them when they cried. She told them stories to help them sleep. She promised them that help was coming, even when she was not sure she believed it herself. Tonight, something felt different. The guards seemed nervous. They whispered to each other in their strange, flat voices. Maya did not understand their language, but she understood fear when she saw it. She pulled the youngest child closer and whispered into his ear, "I think someone is coming for us." Above them, in the cold darkness of space, the human fleet began to move. The human fleet arrived in space without warning. One moment the sensors showed empty darkness. The next moment, 400 ships surrounded them like a ring of silent steel. They did not fire. They did not broadcast threats. They simply took position and waited. High Coordinator watched from the planetary command center. His advisors moved around him in barely controlled panic. Screens showed the human vessels from every angle, battleships the size of small cities, carriers holding hundreds of fighter craft, medical ships and troop transports ready to deploy. "They have us completely surrounded," his military commander reported. "Our defense grid cannot cover all angles simultaneously. If they attack, we cannot stop them." Kept his voice calm. "They will not attack. This is a negotiating tactic. They are trying to frighten us into surrendering the specimens without proper legal process." His aide stepped forward. "High Coordinator, I have been researching human behavior. I do not think this is a negotiation." "Then what is it?" The aide hesitated. "I believe it is a warning. They are showing us what they are capable of before they act." Dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "Summon Ambassador Cole. We will resolve this through proper channels." Cole arrived on a shuttle 2 hours later. She was escorted through the capital by a squad of guards who seemed more nervous than threatening. The streets were empty. The citizens had retreated to their homes when the human fleet appeared. Walked with her back straight and her face expressionless. She wore her formal diplomatic uniform, but there was nothing diplomatic about the look in her eyes. Met her in the central government building. He had prepared a speech about legal rights and territorial sovereignty. He never got to deliver it. "I want to see the children," said before he could speak. "Now." Blinked. "Ambassador, I believe we should first discuss the legal framework that governs this situation. There are procedures that must be followed." "I am not asking," said. "Take me to the children or this conversation ends and a different conversation begins, one that involves Admiral and her fleet." For the first time, felt something cold move through his body. It was not quite fear, but it was close. He had never been spoken to this way. No one in the galaxy had ever dared. "Very well," he said. "We will go to the detention facility." The facility was located on a moon orbiting the... It was a cold place, built from gray metal and harsh lights. It was designed to hold dangerous criminals and foreign threats. It was not designed for children. Walked through the corridors with beside her. She saw the cells where adult prisoners were held. She saw the research labs where scientists studied captured organisms. She felt her stomach turn with disgust, but she kept moving. They reached a section marked for biological specimens. A scientist met them at the entrance. "The human specimens are in holding area 7, the scientist said. "They have been remarkably resilient. Their stress responses are fascinating to study." Did not respond. She pushed past the scientist and walked into holding area 7. The room was large and cold. Metal walls reflected the harsh overhead lights. The floor was bare concrete, and along the walls, in cells designed for animals, were the children. Stopped walking. She stood completely still as she took in the scene before her. The children were huddled in groups. Some lay on thin mats on the floor. Others sat against the walls with blank expressions. They wore simple gray clothing that they had provided. Their faces were pale. Their eyes were tired. In one corner, a little girl with dark hair sat surrounded by smaller children. She was holding a young boy who appeared to be sleeping. Her eyes met across the room. Walked forward slowly. She knelt down in front of the cell where the dark-haired girl sat. Up close, she could see how thin the children had become. She could see the fear in their eyes and the desperate hope that flickered there now. "My name is," she said softly. "I am from Earth. I came to take you home." The dark-haired girl stared at her for a long moment. Then her lip began to tremble. "They kept telling us no one was coming," she whispered. "They said no one knew where we were." "We knew," said, "and we came, all of us came." She reached through the bars and took the girl's hand. It was so small, so thin. Felt her heart break and harden at the same time. "What is your name?" she asked. "Maya," the girl said. "I tried to take care of the little ones. I tried to keep them safe." "You did well," said. "You were so brave, but you do not have to be brave anymore. We are going to take care of you now." She stood up and turned to face. The leader stood near the entrance, watching the scene with confusion. He did not understand the tears forming in his eyes. He did not understand the way her hands had begun to shake. "Open the cells," said. "Ambassador, there are legal procedures that must be completed first. The transfer of specimens requires documentation and approval from the Scientific Council." Walked toward him. Each step was slow and deliberate. She stopped when she was close enough to see her own reflection in his dark eyes. "You put children in cages," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was something terrible in it. "You kept them in a room meant for animals. You let your scientists study them like insects. You fed them nutrient paste and gave them mats on a concrete floor." She leaned closer. "You did this for 19 days. 19 days while their parents wondered if they were alive or dead. 19 days while their families prayed for their return. 19 days while they cried themselves to sleep in a cold room, surrounded by strangers who treated them as things instead of children." Took a step back. For the first time in his life, he felt genuine fear of another being. "You have 6 hours," said. "In 6 hours, every single child will be aboard my shuttle, healthy and unharmed. If this does not happen, Admiral will assume you have chosen war. And I promise you, High Coordinator, you do not want to see what happens next." "This is unreasonable," said. 6 hours is not enough time to process the necessary documents. Our legal system requires proper procedure." Smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Then I suggest you work quickly. Your laws mean nothing to us now. You lost the right to speak of laws when you locked children in cages." She turned back to look at Maya and the other children. "I will return in 6 hours," she said to them. "Be ready, we are going home." Then she walked out of the facility without looking back. Behind her stood in the cold room surrounded by human children. For the first time, he began to understand that he had made a terrible mistake, but he did not yet understand how terrible. That understanding would come soon. Called an emergency meeting of the High Council. The most powerful leaders of his species gathered in the great chamber beneath the capital city. They had ruled the collective for decades. They had faced threats from hostile species and survived. They believed they could survive this as well. "We must research these humans more thoroughly," said. "Their reaction is illogical. We need to understand what drives them." The council agreed. They accessed every database available to them. They pulled records from galactic archives and testimonies from species who had encountered humans before. They studied reports from scientists and diplomats and military observers. What they found made them very uncomfortable. "Their children take approximately 18 years to reach maturity," one counselor reported. "This is extraordinarily long compared to most species. During this time, human adults invest enormous resources in protecting and nurturing their young." "This seems inefficient," another counselor said. "Why would evolution produce such a vulnerable system?" "Because the bond it creates is unlike anything else in the galaxy," a third counselor answered. She had been reading psychological studies. "Human parents do not merely protect their children. They love them in ways we do not fully comprehend. They form emotional attachments that override all other instincts, including self-preservation." The council reviewed historical records. They found accounts of human parents who had performed impossible feats to save their children. A mother who had fought off a predator 3 times her size with her bare hands. A father who had run into a burning structure again and again until he had rescued every child inside. Parents who had starved themselves so their children could eat. "This is concerning," admitted. "But surely there are limits to this behavior. No species would destroy itself over the loss of a few young." The ambassador had been invited to address the council, stood before them now, his silver scales catching the light. He had spent the past hours trying to warn them. Now he tried one more time. "You do not understand," said. "There are no limits, not when it comes to their children." He activated a display screen. "Let me show you something. 200 years ago, a species called the attacked a human colony. They killed 300 adult humans before being driven off. The humans responded with economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure. It took decades, but eventually they forgave the. Today, humans and trade peacefully." He changed the display. 100 years ago, they attacked another human colony. This time, they killed 12 children, just 12. The human response was not sanctions. It was not diplomacy. The screen showed images of burning cities and shattered fleets. The humans hunted them for 15 years. They did not stop until every world had fallen. They did not stop until every ship was destroyed. They did not stop until the species existed only in history books and memorial archives. The council chamber was silent. "They had a larger fleet than humanity at the time," continued. "They had superior technology. They had allies who supported them. None of it mattered. The humans came for them anyway, and they did not stop until it was finished." Felt the cold fear spreading through his body. "Surely the humans would not do this to us. We did not kill the children. We simply detained them." "You put them in cages," said. "You treated them as animals. You made them cry for their parents while scientists studied them like specimens." He paused. "In human eyes, this may be worse than killing them quickly." Meanwhile, aboard the human fleet, Admiral Grace stood on the bridge of her flagship. Around her, officers monitored sensor data and communication channels. Everyone was waiting for the deadline. Grace had received updates from Ambassador Cole. She knew what the children had endured. She knew about the cold cells and the nutrient paste and the scientists who had studied them. She knew about little Maya who had tried to protect the younger ones. Grace thought about her own granddaughter again. She thought about her bright smile and her silly jokes and the way she loved to read stories before bed. She thought about that child sitting in a cold cell for 19 days, alone and afraid. Her hands gripped the railing of the command platform until her knuckles turned white. Around her, the crew of the flagship shared similar thoughts. Many of them had children of their own. Others had nieces and nephews, younger siblings, cousins they had helped raise. Pictures of their families were pinned to workstations throughout the ship. The fleet chaplain had held a service earlier that day. He had spoken about protecting the innocent and answering the call when duty demanded. Hardened veterans who had never shown emotion stood with tears streaming down their faces. Lieutenant Shaw was aboard one of the destroyers in the fleet. His nephew Tommy was in that detention facility, had not slept since receiving the news. He stood at his station, watching the countdown to the deadline. "Come on," he whispered. "Just let them go, please just let them go." In the detention facility had begun the process of releasing the children, but bureaucracy was slow and complicated. Forms had to be filled out, approvals had to be obtained. Scientists protested that their research would be interrupted. The hours ticked by, the deadline approached. Worked faster than he had ever worked before. He overrode procedures and ignored protocols. He physically pushed scientists out of his way, but it was not fast enough. The 6-hour deadline passed. The children were still in their cells. On the flagship, Admiral received the report. She stood very still for a long moment. Then she spoke. "All ships begin advance. Combat formation Alpha, weapons hot." 400 human ships moved forward as one. Their engines glowed in the darkness of space. Their weapons systems powered up with a low hum that seemed to fill the void. In the detention facility, alarms began to sound. Maya heard them and pulled the younger children closer. She did not know what was happening, but she knew something had changed. "It is going to be okay," she told them. "Help is coming, I know it is." Ran through the corridors of the facility. He was shouting orders to guards, demanding that the cells be opened immediately. All procedure was abandoned now. All that mattered was getting those children out before the humans arrived. But even as he ran, he knew he was too late. He had spent too many hours trying to preserve his legal authority. He had wasted too much time on documents and forms. And now the humans were coming. In the command center, an officer watched the approaching fleet with wide eyes. "They are not slowing down," he reported. "They are not attempting communication. They are simply coming." The officer next to him checked the weapons readouts. "High Coordinator, their ships are armed. All of them. Even the civilian vessels have been fitted with weapons." Finally understood. This was not a negotiation. This was not a show of force meant to frighten them into compliance. This was something far more terrible. This was what happened when you took human children. "Open all cells," commanded. "Get those children to the landing bay immediately. All guards are to assist. No one is to harm them. No one is to slow them down." He looked at the screen showing the advancing fleet. "We are out of time." The human Marines hit the detention facility like a thunderstorm. They punched through the thin atmosphere of the moon and landed in precise formation around the building. Armored soldiers poured out before the landing gear had fully deployed. Sergeant Lisa led the first squad through the main entrance. She was 34 years old with short brown hair and steady hands. She had served in 3 combat zones and had never hesitated under fire. But today her heart was beating faster than it ever had. "All teams move to holding Area 7, she commanded through her radio. "Non-lethal engagement unless threatened. Priority is the children." The guards did not resist. They stepped aside as the humans advanced, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. They had seen the fleet in orbit. They knew what would happen if they harmed a single human soldier. Lisa moved through the corridors with her squad close behind. She passed research labs and storage areas and empty cells. The facility was cold and sterile, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. It made her skin crawl to think of children living here. She reached holding Area 7 and stopped at the entrance. The door had been opened by in their desperate attempt to comply with human demands. Inside, she could see the cells where the children had been kept. Most of the cells were empty now. The children had been gathered near the far wall by guards who were trying to organize them for transfer. But in one corner, a small group remained. Lisa saw a girl with dark hair sitting against the wall. 3 younger children were pressed close to her, their faces buried in her shoulders. The girl was staring at the door with fierce eyes, placing herself between the little ones and whatever came through. Lisa lowered her weapon and removed her helmet. She walked forward slowly, her hands visible and open. "Maya," she said softly. The girl flinched at the sound of her name. Then she saw the uniform, saw the human face beneath the combat gear. Her fierce expression crumbled. "You came," Maya whispered. "You really came." Lisa knelt down in front of her. Up close, she could see how thin the girl had become. She could see the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands trembled. She could see 19 days of fear and exhaustion and desperate courage. "We came to take you home," Lisa said. "All of you. Can you help the little ones walk? We have a ship waiting." Maya nodded. She stood up on shaky legs and helped the younger children to their feet. One of them, a boy of about 6, refused to let go of her hand. "Stay close to me," Maya told him. "We are going to be okay now." Lisa led them out of the holding area. In the corridors, more Marines were escorting groups of children toward the landing bay. Medical personnel moved among them, checking for injuries and offering water and comfort. Outside, they waited with their ramps down. Human soldiers formed protective lines around the children as they boarded. Overhead, fighter craft circled in constant patrol, ready to respond to any threat. They watched from a distance. They did not interfere. They did not speak. They simply observed as 47 human children were loaded onto transports and carried away from their world. Stood near the facility entrance. His hands hung at his sides. His dark eyes followed the children as they disappeared into the ships. Ambassador Cole approached him. She had arrived with the Marines and had overseen the evacuation personally. Now she stood before the leader with an expression he could not read. "You expected us to destroy you," she said. Nodded slowly. "After what I have learned about your species, yes, I expected total war." Looked up at the sky where the human fleet waited. "You took our children. You put them in cages. You made them suffer." She paused. "Part of me wanted to see your world burn." "Then why did you not give that order?" Turned back to face him. "Because those children need to see that the nightmare is over. They need to see that the people who hurt them have been held accountable. But they also need to see that humans are not monsters. They need to see that we can be merciful, even when mercy is difficult." She stepped closer to him. "You will face justice for what you did. Your government will answer for its actions. But your people will survive and your world will remain standing. This is not forgiveness. This is a choice to be better than our anger." Was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I did not understand. When we took them, I truly did not understand what they meant to you. I thought they were simply young members of your species, no different from cargo or resources." "I know," said. "That is why your world still exists. Ignorance is not innocence, but it is different from malice." She turned to leave. "Learn from this. Teach your people what you have learned. Make sure no ever makes this mistake again." The last lifted off, was aboard along with the final group of children. Maya sat near a window, watching the moon shrink below them. A medical officer wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders. Someone else pressed a cup of hot soup into her hands. Voices surrounded her, soft and kind, asking if she was hurt, if she needed anything. Maya drank the soup slowly. It was the first real food she had tasted in 19 days. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. In orbit, the children were transferred to the medical ships. Doctors and counselors waited for them. Parents who had traveled with the fleet waited too, desperate for the moment they could hold their children again. Lieutenant Shaw stood in the docking bay when the shuttles arrived. He searched every face that came through the door. Then he saw a small boy with brown hair and tired eyes. Tommy breathed. The boy looked up. Recognition flickered across his face. Then he ran forward and threw himself into his uncle's arms. Held him tight. He felt the small body shaking with sobs against his chest. He felt his own tears falling freely. "I got you," whispered. "You are safe now, I got you." 6 months later, Maya stood before the Galactic Union Assembly. She was no longer the frightened girl in the cold cell. She had gained weight. Her eyes were bright again. She wore a simple dress and stood at a podium that had been lowered so she could reach it. Representatives from 50 species filled the chamber. They had come to hear the testimony of a child who had survived detention. "We were scared," Maya said. Her voice was clear and steady. "We did not know if anyone would come for us. They told us that no one was looking. They said we were alone." She paused and looked around the chamber. "But we were not alone. Our people came for us. All of them came. Not because we were important or special, but because we were children, because that is what humans do." In a holding cell on a neutral station, watched the broadcast. He was awaiting trial for his role in the detention. He watched the little girl speak, and he finally understood what they had tried to tell him so many months ago. "Humans are not cruel," Maya continued. "They did not hurt the one they could have. They did not destroy their world. They chose to be kind even though they were angry." She looked directly at the camera. "But they also chose to protect us, and they will always choose that, always." The chamber was silent when she finished. Then the ambassador rose and addressed the assembly. "Remember this day," said. "Remember what happens when you threaten what humans hold most precious." They came with 400 ships for 47 children. They did not negotiate. They did not hesitate. They simply came. He looked around at the assembled species. They chose mercy this time. They chose to show that they are more than their anger, but do not mistake mercy for weakness. The next species that harms human children may not receive the same grace. He paused and let his words settle over the chamber. Their children are sacred to them. This line must never be crossed. Remember what almost happened to them, and pray that you never force humanity to make a different choice. The assembly remained silent. The lesson had been learned. Somewhere in human space, Maya returned to her family. She hugged her parents and played with her younger brother. She started school again and made new friends. She laughed and smiled and slowly healed from her ordeal. And throughout the galaxy, species who had once dismissed humans as unremarkable began to look at them differently. They saw the merchants and diplomats and explorers. They saw the smiles and the handshakes and the friendly words. But they also saw the fleet that had come together in 6 hours. They saw the Marines who had breached a detention facility without mercy. They saw a species that would cross the galaxy for their children and would never, ever stop coming. Humanity had sent a message that would echo through the stars for generations. "Do not touch our children. We will find you, and we will come."